Hello, my name's Elisa Riley, and I'm Clarivine's Director of Product Marketing. I'm excited to welcome you today for the first in a multi-part webinar series where we'll explore the value of standardized data in the Snowflake Data Cloud. In this first session, we'll examine how our new integration to Snowflake streamlines metadata management and powers campaign intelligence. And I'd like to welcome our speakers today. Chris Comstock, Chief Growth Officer at Claravine, and Jim Warner, Global Field CTO for Advertising and Marketing at Snowflake. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris and Jim.
All right, thanks, Elisa. And Jim, thanks for joining us. I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about, and hopefully there's nothing new on this slide, many of the things happening right now in market for marketing teams, data science teams, and really everyone all the way down to consumers. So there's, a lot of regulation. We talk about, privacy and GDPR. I know GDPR seems like so long ago, but all of the new regulations, different states, different countries, and trying to manage that from a customer brand perspective. The fragmentation in the market, I feel like everything used to be simple with digital, and now it feels like everyone's an ad network, and there's all the different streaming services, and trying to reach your right consumer becomes even harder, especially with everyone kind of trying to take over the attention of consumers. The big one, generative AI. I know it feels like it's been years in the making, but it's been, 18 months, I think, since ChatGPT was released, which is an exciting time. I know there's some recent changes with, Google and OpenAI this week, I guess, for, just everything from generative AI to tagging to, streamlining content production, which I think is an exciting time for marketers. And then related to somewhat the fragmentation, the signal loss. So, 2015, Safari removed third-party cookies. Fast forward to today, and at some point, Google's going to remove third-party cookies. Who knows when that's going to happen? But there's just a lot of change that is having an impact on how you measure success and reach the right customers. And so we always show this example of, we talk about maybe the content supply chain from creative to your operations teams to, the customer experience in the operation, and then all the way to the data and analytics teams. And in reality, that is not a linear process. There's different teams and technologies that go into play. There's people involved. Every organization, big and small, has different solutions they're using, different ways of working, different requirements. And so this is we present as a view that creates a little bit more chaos, and that chaos can create confusion and issues across those teams and across data. As we think about generative AI, it's exciting from a dynamic creative and personalization and creating more assets to test, where the friction used to exist maybe more on the creative production side for teams. It's becoming much easier to create those assets and test different messaging and different backgrounds and other things. As you start to take, in this example, if you had just 1,000 products and you had 25 different versions of those 1,000 products, and 1,000 different versions or permutations you wanted to test against customer audiences in different countries, the scale and the number of assets to test across those different publishers and audiences is almost unmanageable for many teams to do and make sense of as they are building and measuring that content. And so that creates problems for everyone of, fixing data to understanding what audience and what creative in market was set up. Is it the right message? Is it set up right as people are moving fast to try and keep up with that content production? And then also ultimately finding assets that may already exist and having teams spend time recreating things that, they may have been able to use that was created by another team. And so at Claravine, this is how we think and talk to our customers. We try and take the drama out of that marketing data, ultimately by providing data standards. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by data standards at the source, and creating a world where people, teams, and technology, and today we'll talk about Snowflake and how we enable teams on Snowflake to have a shared understanding of their data. All right. And so as I mentioned, and we're going to go through a demo and kind of show you how this works. But when we think about data standards, there's a lot that goes into that. And I've asked a lot of customers what do you think of when you think of metadata or taxonomy? And I get a wide range of answers. I get everything from what's on their link to naming conventions to traditional taxonomy ontology management systems. And so this is kind of how we present the world when we think of data standards. It includes everything from the teams, the experiences you're building. There's metadata around, those people and teams, the creative assets and different dams, different product information, product catalogs, and then a lot of metadata that we'll talk about from a media and campaign perspective. And then as you move over to the right, how does that translate into those operations and teams building your campaigns? There's the link structure. What should be on the link to make sure that the data is available to the systems to personalize and measure? Naming conventions, how things are named, so people in the platforms can find what they need. That taxonomy, tagging can mean something different to different teams. Creative tagging, creative metadata, tagging for naming conventions, data mapping. So where data goes in the organization, how do we take and translate what your maybe media and agency team name something, and then how does the data team normalize that to their analytic systems and dashboards? And then the governance of, as you think about what asset should be used for what message in what market, how does that transfer across that content supply chain so the teams know they're putting the right message in market for the right audience, and they don't have to worry at night and keep wondering if there's something wrong in their campaigns. Oops, let's see here, next slide. And so we think about, we talk about these data sets, everything from strategy, creative, customers. These data sets exist today, whether they live in a spreadsheet, whether they live in technology systems, and there's people using a variety of technologies to build and create these data sets. So again, workflow, work management systems for media, content teams, but the actual creative assets, customer data itself, media data, so what campaigns are being used, the audience targeting mapped to specific placements, specific publishers, and then ultimately what is the performance of all those media campaigns? So how are they doing over time on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? And so this is where, from a Claravine perspective, we help bring these data sets together through metadata and taxonomy. And so how does your data connect together? Regardless of what technology system it was generated by, how do we make sure these data sets are joined and connected together? So when it ends up in a system like Snowflake, you can build and trust the data and make sense of it, that your data quality is as high as it possibly can be. And so we'll jump in here in a minute to our platform. And so this is kind of how we think about the different components. I know this is a lot on here, but there's four main areas kind of in the middle. There's that core set of data, which we'll see is what we're going to ultimately make available in Snowflake. But as we think about how we build and govern and build links and manage that taxonomy, there's a number of different elements, things like pick lists and the taxonomy, and tracking codes. All the way up into the templates, or the combination of those different things, the business logic of, how does that get represented? How do teams want that viewed? What are the data relationships? And then obviously for us, there's the people and the teams that are using the applications and using Claravine specifically to help proactively manage their marketing taxonomy. And so as we think about putting those standards in place, there's really four main use cases. So there's, pulling existing data together, creating new data, so creating campaigns, creating assets, creating naming conventions, automating that data, and then ultimately, how do you manage that change going forward? And so we're going to dig into a few of these. So as we think about managing campaign names, placement names, hundreds of thousands of rows of data, making sure that they're all structured the same way with the right naming convention, the right taxonomy, and removing those errors up front to make sure that the teams have that data structured in such a way that they can be confident in the decisions that they're making. Then there's the improving the data when it's created. So a lot of teams will use our platform to help manage that metadata, create the naming conventions, and help make sure that before their campaign goes live, that data is structured right from the get-go and matches all that existing data, maybe the last 2-3 years worth of metadata, so they can create that unified view to understand year over year what campaigns are working, and build that, make sure that there's no disconnected data or customer experiences when those campaigns go live. And then there's the future proofing, and this is where we'll talk about kind of how that data goes into Snowflake specifically, that collaboration, the change from your operations teams, your media teams, your creative teams, to your data teams and your analytics systems, being able to manage that change over time. All right, get it over to you, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think, you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about sort of the industry trends that we're seeing. And that's really leading to a lot of companies that are using Snowflake as really the foundation of their marketing. And we kind of break down why we think our platform is a great platform to do that into these three pillars. First of all, it's a single, easy to use platform that can take all data through all methods and load it into a single place without silos, with native AI, right? So you're not re-siloing your data to run AI. Second, it is privacy first and governed. That's really important as marketing becomes more focused on first party data on things like PII and less on anonymous pools of third party cookies. And finally, a robust ecosystem of partners. We at Snowflake are not necessarily in the business of making UIs that are directly used by marketers. And so that's really where we rely on our ecosystem of partners to kind of really build on top of the single source of truth, which is Snowflake. So you can go on to the next slide. One of the really important parts of that we're seeing is people who are building their marketing data foundation on top of Snowflake. And one of those use cases is campaign intelligence. As you mentioned, there's this explosion of channels that marketing teams are using, retail media and more streaming services, and that adds on to the digital and the social. And so there's just more and more data that needs to be really unified to give marketing teams that single pane of glass to understand all of their investments across channels. And so you've got all of these data sources that are being brought into Snowflake either with, first party connectors or with ETL or ELT tools, and being brought into Snowflake where the data is sort of unified and governed, and then dashboards are built on top to give the organization that single view of the marketing campaigns. But there are challenges here, right? So there's a lot of things that make it difficult to really create this single view of marketing. So we mentioned the exploding number of channels. We mentioned that ad data is siloed. And this is a challenge. If you go to do an advanced use case like MMM, you want to do media mix modeling, you need to have your ad data sitting alongside other data. We know marketing budgets are under pressure and they have to really show the value of their investments. And then the one that we're obviously going to talk about here is metadata, right? I think metadata is often inconsistent across channels. Campaigns can be created manually. If the metadata is really managed in a unified way at all, sometimes it's in a large and unwieldy spreadsheet, and that can make it really hard to get the insights from the data that the marketing team is really looking for.
Take mute off. All right. Demo time. Live demos are always fun. Before we jump into that, I thought it would make sense to kind of visualize what we're going to see and what we're going to talk about between taking the data from Claravine and managing metadata, pushing it into Snowflake, and kind of what is that, the different data sources that you need. We've talked about them to some degree, but obviously there's all the platforms on the left, which, are creating campaigns, experiences, both from a, acquisition, retention perspective from customers where brands are trying to reach their customers, whether that be onsite or offsite, generating performance. So knowing how those campaigns are doing and looking at that reporting data. So from a media perspective, things like impression, delivery, CPM, budget, all of that metadata getting pulled in through an ETL vendor to aggregate that data from those different systems from a performance perspective. There's the Claravine metadata that can help join and connect this data in, having a single source of truth for your campaign metadata to feed into your analytics system. In this case, Snowflake, where that data gets joined alongside of that performance data to create the views and, be able to accurately slice and dice that performance data. And then there's the user level behavior data. So, Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, the different website, mobile app data, where you have customer data, both anonymous and known, to be able to pull that data in, maybe even purchase data from a, in-store perspective of where you have an email address and you're capturing that information. How do you merge and bring that data all together in a system like Snowflake. And so this is kind of how it all lays out. And there's obviously the dashboards and the visualizations that sit on top of that data set, or the combination of those data sets together. And so let me switch over here to see if this transitions correctly. All right, and so this is the Claravine, the Data Standards Cloud. I mentioned the concept of a template, and so we're gonna use an example for media placement names in this case. And so when you think about what that template is, oops, let's see here. Let's try that again. I don't know what just happened. When we think about what the data definitions are, so you've got a placement name as an example, you've got a number of different fields. That template is for us where that metadata, the standards, the dropdowns, text fields, the logic around how that data should ultimately be viewed. And so in this example here, I'm going to take some example names that typically, these probably look familiar. I'm just going to pick a subset of them. And I'm going to bring those into Claravine. And so in one way where we define what that looks like, we can break apart existing data. So it's that first use case we talked about. You've got a lot of data sitting in different systems. You may have rules to make sense of this data in many different places, right? In your analytics system, there may already be data sitting in Snowflake where someone's building exception tables. We've heard kind of about those tables to understand that data as it comes in. As we think about having that single source of truth, we can look at that data and say, someone thought it was right, maybe from their vantage point it was right from a naming convention perspective, but it doesn't match the standards. And so this is the set of platforms and how they should be described. And so they can go through here and quickly see where they should validate, validate that data. And I changed one here, change that back. And you'll notice here that I can't send that data to Snowflake, which I'll show you how that works, until all that data has been cleaned up. So as we think about proactively managing that data quality, this is here in cross-device. And so once I validate and structure the data correctly, I know that I can send it and push it to any of the places that I've configured this template specifically to map that data to. And so I would go through and submit this data here and validate all that data is going to go through. And what that is sending that data over, I'm going to go through here, and this is more that configuration side. And so getting a little bit of a preview here from an integration perspective, but we have this concept of inbound and outbound integration. So I copied and pasted that data into a template. We also have some connectors where we can connect out into different systems, whether that be digital asset management systems for creative media systems to bring in that data, or even have teams that are helping create that data. Bring it in, and then in this case here where we're pushing it to Snowflake, I've already connected to a Snowflake account, and then I'm pulling that into the specific account and I'm pushing it to a specific table in that account. And here's where I can control and manage that that future proofing and the mapping of data from the, come back here real quick, the media team needs it named a certain way and they have their way of working, but that may not map exactly to what we need in Snowflake and to push it into the table for the reporting and analytics. So here you can see not all the fields are being sent. I can choose to send all the fields. I can change the format and map to different field names, but here it gives you that control to collaborate with your data teams on how it should end up in Snowflake. I'm gonna stop sharing and hand it over to Jim for you to kind of show how it looks in Snowflake.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So here I have loaded that metadata through from Claravine into a table in Snowflake. So you can see these same this same metadata that you were just showing has landed in Snowflake. At the same time, I have loaded the actual data from the different platforms into Snowflake as well. So we have, these are the informations on the placements for a given campaign. This is sort of daily snapshots of the data with the number of impressions, clicks, conversions, and so forth that have come through the different channels and been aggregated up by placement by day. And without something like Claravine, in order to get to sort of the specific type of reporting that I might need, I might need to I might need to parse these placement names and find the which column in this Franken name, as I like to call it, that I care about. I might have to parse that out, and I might have to, clean it up because there might be inconsistent naming if it hadn't been already handled. There might be inconsistent numbers of columns. Maybe some of these were missing a column. I've seen I've seen a wide variety of very messy metadata over the years. But with Claravine, with the metadata being unified and loaded, we can be confident that this is all correct. So then that allows us to do reporting. So here I'm doing reporting by month, where I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at it by strategy. Okay. And so now that strategy is going to be sort of across channels. So, regardless of what channel the actual ad ran on, I can be sure that the strategy is clean and conforms to the data standards that we've set. And I can look at a chart, I can add it by strategy, and here I can see a line chart that's showing me how many impressions I'm having by strategy by month. Let's look at another one here. This is a query that shows the data by month by persona, the number of impressions by month by persona. Again, regardless of what channel it's actually running in, I can be sure that the personas match the data standards. And when I go here and graph the data by persona, I can see by month how many impressions I'm running against each persona, all clean, all conforming to the standards. So it makes it really easy to have your data and your metadata both loaded into Snowflake, where you're just doing the join based on the placement ID and being sure that the data is all coming through cleanly.
All right. Let me reshare here, and maybe we'll jump into some Q&A.
The first one, and Jim and Chris, if you guys can both talk a little to this, but what are use cases for this data once people have it?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the Snowflake perspective, we're seeing a lot of it when it comes time to do reporting, right? So when people are kind of creating that single pane of glass to understand their advertising and marketing spend across channels, it's important to be able to break the data down in the way that you want to be able to see it. I think also when it comes to things like ad measurement, we're accustomed to being able to measure sort of the effectiveness of a given channel. But what about the effectiveness of a given strategy? What about the effectiveness of reaching a given persona? So I think being able to cut the data in different ways for reporting and ad measurement is one of the key use cases we see at Snowflake.
Yeah, I think how to say this nicely. There's, everyone's been talking about AI and using AI and personalization. I don't think that a lot of these data challenges that, cleaning up the data that Jim mentioned are really tend to be a blocker for teams to really turn on and trust the data if they want to actually feed into any AI modeling optimization. So I think that's one that like this, we see that kind of moving forward to opening up those teams to trust their inputs to the model such that they can actually leverage and turn on the AI and personalization decisions or recommendation engines that they've built. Yeah, I think that's a big kind of one that's going to come up more and more in the future.
Great. You guys gave a couple examples as you were going through, but what type of data can this help with? Specifically, the question is, what about creative metadata from our DAM?
Yeah, I can take that one. So one of the things we've focused a lot on, and it's definitely, content performance, I think, with cookies going away and other things, aggregate data, clean rooms. I know that's a big area of focus for Snowflake. As data gets aggregated, you need to understand what the inputs were, what message was tested against what audience. And so being able to connect, kind of further upstream and leverage the great work that your creative and content teams are doing to be able to inform media decisions. I think that's a huge opportunity, which is often, disconnected in different teams. that are creating and managing those things, often because the assets in the dam are removed and uploaded into an ad server, for example. And so trying to help bridge that gap to make that metadata more impactful and more useful as those performance, optimization decisions are made.
Great. This question is, what changes from the way we send data from Claravine to Snowflake today? We already use both tools. So this is probably from an existing customer.
Yep. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, Jim. I mean, from our vantage point, we've got a number of customers pushing data to Snowflake via kind of their own process and data pipelines. We see this as an opportunity to get the data there and create, more of a systematic way to manage that change from what the what the operations team needs to be able to translate that directly into tables and data sitting within Snowflake.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a simplification, right? It just making it easier for our mutual customers to use both products. Before you might have been sending data from Claravine into S3 and then loading the data from S3 into Snowflake. I'm just trying to make things easier on our mutual customers.
Great, and then I have one more. We're moving from another system. How can this help? I'm assuming they mean another system that maybe isn't Snowflake.
Yeah, so I know we've had some customers that have gone through this process, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit, that they're typically the business rules, whether they're, I know Adobe has what they call processing rules, and there's other ways of managing these data translations in different systems. And so this usually is a way to centralize and standardize that. And so, making those changes once, having that single source of truth for all of your systems, which, they're going to change. There's going to be new systems that come around tomorrow that you need to manage, and how things are named and their data requirements. And so ideally it's, there's going to be some lift in process of moving things and changing reporting, but, hopefully the lift as we think about this integration makes it much, much easier to make the changes from a business logic perspective and get the data in a place in Snowflake that, can be used by the data teams much faster.
Yeah, I think we've seen it, we have a lot of folks moving systems from a campaign intelligence perspective, where they're moving from our legacy system to a system based on Snowflake. And we've seen tools like Claravine really streamline that, right? Because you're just confident in the metadata when it lands, and you're not worried about the parsing rules and the exceptions and all of that, and it just really kind of streamlines the process. So that's one of the reasons we're excited about the partnership.
Great. Well, no other questions have come in, and we're at time. So thank you both for joining, and thank everybody who's on. If you have any questions, please reach out and we'll follow up with more information soon.